There is something fabulous. Every culture, I'm not being nationalistic in saying that. Every culture actually in the world has something unique to offer. I would hate a world which is standardized.
Big brand is wanting to go global. We are brilliant with our domestic influence. We are one of the largest film producing nations of the world. And yet we are aspirational, and our aspiration is like a bullet train, a Japanese Shinkansen, which is going to go tearing apart and is going to be aspirationally turning global. Where do these two narratives meet, and how do you see the story unfold?
Well, first of all, I think thank you, Kans, for focusing on India. I think India is raring to go. मैं इंडिया को अगर हिंदी में एक लाइन में करूँ तो बेचैन सपने मुझे इंडिया लगता है. Restless dreams is what I often in briefing sessions and all that, when you have to just say what is India today, it's actually restless dreams. Whether you go in startups, you go in content, everywhere you're seeing this restlessness of doing something. Not looking back, but looking forward. I think that said, when we talk about organically India being, are we talking about content consumers from India or content creators from India? Content consumer is seeing India as a market, how to reach out to those people. Every brand is trying to do that. That's a different reality. When we talk about content creators, and today we are talking about content creation here, coming from India. How can you take Indian content? Because organically we have grown content sort of market. That's happening. And there, if you go the way Scott, we were talking yesterday, the Korea approach. That's the approach to understand the market in the world and say, what can India design for this market? So you understood these are the tastes, this is the way, these are the cultural code, this is the lexicon, and how can I take India and what can be produced in India and make it palatable for all the market, and reach out to them. And that's what Korea did, in a sense. A K-pop or a K-drama reached out with a Korean flavor, reached out and catered to the market of the world. Now the second approach, where I feel, and Anuragji will be with me on that India is also dying to tell their own story, its own story. Our own ideas, our own stories. And for which we were talking yesterday, we were talking about certain wiring. You are brought up with a certain cultural wiring. You consume symbols. You consume... I have a theory, like you look at something, a girl coming to you on a picture, and she has something on her forehead which is red. An Indian will immediately decode it, that she's a married woman and she has got sindoor on her head. First thing will be that. That's cultural eye. In absence of this cultural eye, your organism's eye kicks in. And you see the same thing. A woman approaching me, she has a red mark on her head. Maybe she is hurt. Maybe there is blood there. In absence of the knowledge of the fact that the married woman wear a red symbol, you consume the same image differently. Now, yes, Indian stories and Indian, we've been brought up to consume them in a certain way. But that's where the challenge is. This is a more complex task when we want to tell your stories and you feel they are worth telling. And they are worth telling. They are fabulous. How do you reach out with those stories? It can not only be done at the cinema level. It has to be done when you're going to institutes, studying and other cultural forums, books, discussions, festivals, where you try and decode the culture. If the world is interested in India, you'll start decoding. We did it with many other cultures. We did it with the Western culture when it came to India. why can't that be done by the rest of the world to consume that culture? Because there is something fabulous. Every culture, I'm not being nationalistic in saying that. Every culture actually in the world has something unique to offer. I would hate a world which is standardized. So, and India, another thing which is important in this context is diversity, which India understands. वो कहते हैं कि कोस कोस पे पानी बदले चार कोस पे बानी. कोस कोस पे पानी बदले चार कोस पे बानी. Every kilometer you walk, you have a different language in India. Now, a country which is so comfortable and communicating has been making cinema and content for people where every kilometer you have a different language. Please understand, when we go to the world, why would we connect?
So decoding...
We are so used to diversity in a true sense.
So diversity, decoding culture are, hallmark acronyms here. And Scott, you've often argued that the aspirational part of India globally, with a large domestic market which not just produces such large number of films, also generates revenue for that kind of content which is created. When that gets aspirational, what does it mean in terms of its global contextuality? You were talking glaringly about it yesterday. Today, what just now Prasoon said and Shekhar says, India also being digitally aspirational, what is this story as far as its global influence is concerned?
Yeah, I thank you very much first for inviting me to talk here. I think I'm maybe less boisterous about the potential for Indian content internationally, just because of its incredible strength of its local market. If I could compare it to anything, I'd compare it to China, which has a similar incredibly strong domestic market. It's now the second or largest box office territory in the world, but has not been able to really export its films, even though they make huge films, very distinct films about their own culture and history. They haven't really managed to cross over to the international market. And I would argue that India hasn't either, despite having a very long history of cinema, having a great tradition of storytelling. The type of Indian storytelling that is so appealing to the Indian market has not yet crossed over to the international. And I'm not sure if it will, because it's not just about having the talent, it's just not just about having the ability to make stories. There's something else that's needed. And I'm not sure. It'll be interesting to see. I see the great ambition coming out of India, and the potential is obvious. But I think there are a lot of other components, and it's not something that can be easily programmed, especially not from a government. This is perhaps not the place to be political, but the any connection, when the government gets very involved in culture, if they get too involved, the culture ends up, suffering, in my opinion. And we've seen as well, just recently with Russia, the culture, the artists of a country can become tainted by association if the government does something that is viewed as controversial or problematic internationally.
I think what Scott said was very important, but we need to argue this. I'll tell you why we need to argue this. I was shooting with Heath Ledger just before he passed away, just before Joker, and I suddenly realized in Morocco, where I was filming, everybody left the sets of Star Wars to come to see Heath Ledger. And I suddenly realized they hadn't come to see Heath Ledger. They thought that I, from India, am shooting a Bollywood film with Shah Rukh Khan. You know? There is nowhere that I can go right now without everybody saying, where in the world? You see, because we have an attitude that the people who can judge us can only judge us from a Western point of view. Where does, you ask me the difference? We are melodramatic people. We celebrate melodrama, and I'll tell you what I'm coming to. We think that death is melodramatic. We think that falling in love is melodramatic. Or that's what you think. We think it's mythic. I think being born is a mythic idea. Falling in love, being betrayed, dying, everything is mythology. In the West, somehow, there is some kind of shyness of accepting this as mythology. So why am I getting to this? I did a film called Elizabeth, my first film outside India. And I'm thinking, how am I going to do this? This is the biggest queen most famous queen in the world, actually, and I'm an Indian filmmaker coming out to make my first film. How do I do this? I said, yeah, actually, I'm a mythic idea. To me, everything about Elizabeth was mythic. And when I was shooting it, everybody said, Shekhar, that's so melodramatic. That's so melodramatic. I said, no, it's mythic. Actually, the reviews also said, it's a very melodramatic film. And I said, yes. They said, it's a Bollywood film. I said, yes. And then we got nominated for 9 Oscars. And Elizabeth and Kate Blanchett became one of the biggest stars in the world. There is this conflict between the West and the East. The West seems to be losing out. I can promise you it'll lose out because not accepting that we are melodramatic beings. Human beings are melodramatic and mythic at the same time. We celebrate mythology. That's why Chinese films are not coming abroad yet, because the world in Western cinema, the critics, haven't yet learned to celebrate the idea of living mythically. Take me on, Scott.
Yeah. No, I think it's very interesting you say, and it's. I think I would argue that it comes from a form of translation. I think what you did with Elizabeth was a very compelling translation of Indian cinema making, emotional, the way you were talking about, this melodramatic, mythic cinema making, with a very Western story in a lot of ways. And you were able to translate the language into something else which was then understandable for an international audience. I think what can be difficult is getting the untranslated version, if I can say it that way. I think that's with a lot of Chinese cinema, for example, the big sort of blockbuster cinema that they produce. It's not that they aren't telling compelling stories and doing it in a very distinctive Chinese way. It's that for audiences outside of China, they don't quite understand the language. They don't quite get it. And I don't think it's enough to say, well, you should become more mythic or understand the mythic. I think Western audiences can. They just haven't been used to seeing cinema that way and seeing stories told that way. So they need some form of translation. And that translation can come in taking a very Western story and telling it in a very Indian way, which is, I think, what you did with Elizabeth. It can come in other ways as well. But I think you need that. I would argue that's sort of what Korea has done. With it, they tell very Korean stories, and they do it in a very Korean way, but they have such an influence, they have taken so much Western influence into their storytelling that they are very easily translatable and easily understandable. Parasite, for me, could have been a Spielberg movie, but it's told in a very Korean way with a very specific Korean setting. But they've managed to find that translation, and I think that's what India has to do if it wants to reach international audiences with its storytelling, to find a form of translation. Doesn't mean being untrue to the core of the mythic core that you're talking about. Doesn't mean that at all. But it needs something in order for, you can't just expect audiences to understand who don't know the culture, who don't have the tradition, and don't know all the films that you might be referencing and so forth, the stories.
One more thing which we are actually ignoring. See, this is an absolute new reality we are living in. Culture is a living, throbbing organism. It's complete. As we speak, it's getting shaped. And the world we are living in today has hyper interaction. And the way it's not a static identity that when we say this is Western mind, I think this all is getting now subsumed, all these identities. And we are, as Shekhar a while back said, that a village girl is shooting a 15-second reel TikTok and becoming viral. Sometimes we are getting videos from which country we don't even know, and we're suddenly agnostic to the source. Now, content will gradually become source agnostic in the nature when you would not be first searching the source and then enjoying it. Because simultaneously the cultural exposure through other means is also increased. So as we are evolving, I think considering culture as a static identity would not be correct. It is evolving. And in that context, Indian stories, and again I will say with authenticity, somebody needs to be very cognizant of authenticity, because world requires pure diversity. Standardization could be a dream of a marketeer, but cannot be a dream of a creative person.
we have to redefine what we mean by media and entertainment, right? The fact that Marvel creates, they spend as much money or even much more money on marketing something than they do in creating something. Much more melodramatic than any Indian film I've seen. The performances are, and I was always told, make sure your actors don't perform like Indian actors. What the hell are they doing? Right? Marketing, marketing, marketing. Now the studio power of marketing is collapsing because one little girl from a small town or village in India will get up and beat them. It's the new world. It's a democracy of media and entertainment. For whatever we say, yes, yeah, Twitter is going through huge problems. I don't know what Elon Musk is going to do with it. But the fact is that the young people in India, with all that technology, as he said, the new AI use, I am teaching the use of AI at MIT for storytelling. It's going to change everything. And the new stories will come from restless people, restless kids. And they'll come from kids that have access to technology. And they will change the world. And they, in India, we have a vast number of them. And they will create, sir, the new $1 trillion economy. Yeah? Okay.
I think it would be ridiculous to bet against India. I mean, the potential there is undeniable. I guess what I was trying to say with criticism or talking about the problem with politics is that I think politics can set up structures, they can set up a thing, but anytime politics gets too involved in culture, I think it hinders and can poison the culture. If I'm being very straightforward, what I think, if the potential of India is to be realized culturally and also exported around the world, it has to be done so by the people and the creators within India and not from a top-down way, and by unleashing actually what you were talking about, which I think are the greatest strengths of India, which is its tremendous diversity, religious, ethnic, cultural, and its unbelievable, deep, and for a worldwide audience, untold well of stories. And if that is done, then of course there are no limits.